Hello and welcome to Trails Worth Hiking, the show that brings you some of the most interesting backpacking and trekking routes in the world. I'm your host, Jeremy Pendry. In the first part of the show, we bring you the story and history of a trail. Then we tell you what it's like to hike the trail and how you can do it. On this episode, we are going back to the tallest mountain range on Earth for a trek where we will stay in welcoming tea houses in quaint mountain villages, where we'll eat freshly cooked dal bhat as we climb higher and higher toward Mount Everest, the tallest mountain on Earth. On this episode of Trails Worth Hiking, we head back to the Himalayas of Nepal, and this time it's go big or go home, as we trek to Everest Base Camp. Hello and welcome to the show, everyone. Thank you for joining me. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Trails Worth Hiking Podcast. All right, this is a big episode. We've got a lot of great content, so let's get into it. First, though, an announcement. Trails Worth Hiking is now on YouTube. So if you are a YouTube user, please subscribe to the show on YouTube. It's the same content as we have here on the podcast version. It's only audio, but it is another channel to get the show out to other folks. And the YouTube algorithm is great at pushing content out to people based on what they're interested in. So it's maybe a more efficient way to get the podcast out to more folks who really want to learn about these trails. If you go to YouTube right now, if you're a YouTube user, and subscribe to the show there, comment on your favorite episodes, all of that will really help more people become aware of the show. So even if you're already subscribing to the show through a podcast app, please go to YouTube and subscribe to the show there as well. Also, on the YouTube channel of the show, I've added playlists. So there are playlists for different regions and for different types of hikes. And I'll probably add additional playlists as we continue to make episodes. And also, the comments are a place where you can engage with me and other listeners about the episodes, which is something that we're not yet doing through podcast apps right now. So please subscribe on YouTube and comment on your favorite episodes. That would really help the show. Thank you. So let's do our Walking the Walk segment, where we give a shout out to listeners who were inspired by the show to hike a trail. So I heard from Sarah and Mike Hallis, and they decided to hike the Shenandoah on the AT, which was from episode 39 with Steph Lancaster, who was our guest on that episode. And for Sarah and Mike, this was their first multi-day hike. They had previously hiked locally in North Carolina, but going for multiple days was a new experience. And if you haven't listened to episode 39 and you're new to multi-day hiking, you may really want to check that out, because it's a unique hike in the United States where you get an opportunity to stay in lodges rather than camping, but still do a several-day hike in a beautiful national park on the Appalachian Trail. So it's a unique opportunity and a great way to introduce yourself to multi-day hiking without having to take camping gear. They say they hiked south to north, starting at South River Picnic Area to Lewis Mountain Cabins. And day 2 was from Lewis Mountain Cabins to Big Meadows. And then day 3, they started doing what they thought would be a short side hike down to Lewis Falls, but it turned out to be an 800-foot rocky, straight down kind of a drop, and a little bit more challenging than they had expected. But they were still able to go and do their final trek from Big Meadows to Skyland, the final 8 miles of the hike, which was a pretty exhausting day, having that side trek as well. They said they love being in the green tunnel. And I know I've described East Coast United States hiking as being a green tunnel often, lots of foliage, and often you have to come out of the foliage to get to the top of mountains to have good views. They say they encountered lots of deer, and they say they also came across several through hikers on the Appalachian Trail, which was really cool. And I've done that on the PCT, on the Pacific Crest Trail, come across through hikers who are out there hiking the entire length of the trail. And it's really fun to talk to them and to hear about their adventures. And it sounds like Sarah and Mike had that opportunity as well. They said the lodges had amazing food, and they recommend the blackberry chicken wings and blackberry lemonade. So there you have it. Sarah and Mike Hallis had a great adventure on the Appalachian Trail in Shenandoah National Park. And they're currently planning next year to hike the Foothills Trail, which was from episode 16. So they're going to get a little bit more adventurous, it seems, and that this nice introduction of lodge to lodge hiking may lead to some more traditional backpacking. So we'll see how that goes and look forward to hearing from them then. So congratulations to Sarah and Mike Hallis, and good luck next year on the Foothills Trail. All right, I want to introduce a new segment to the show, which I am calling the Trails Worth Hiking Featured Mini Adventure. So what this is I want to feature 1 or 2 night adventures at most, basically a weekend adventure that we can cover in just a few minutes. And this still needs to be an overnight trip. I'm not leaving behind my self-imposed rule of only covering multi-day hikes. But these are trips that maybe aren't big enough to warrant having their own episode, but maybe a favorite of yours wherever you live, maybe a nearby hike. It could be something as simple as a 6-mile hike to a lake and back the next day, or something a little more adventurous, but still relatively short trip. Basically weekend trips that you can recommend to others. So if you have a favorite overnight or weekend adventure in your area that you think others should know about, reach out to me through email, trailsworthhiking@gmail.com, or through the YouTube channel, or through Instagram. All right, so let's do our introductory Trails Worth Hiking mini adventure. And this adventure that I'm going to talk about is one I did recently with my son. It's called the Manzana Schoolhouse. And now I'm tempted to pronounce manzana in the Spanish pronunciation, but I'll try to do the English pronunciation, which sounds wrong to me. We'll call it I can't even do it. Manzana? Okay, let's say Manzana. Manzana Schoolhouse, which is in Los Padres National Forest in Santa Barbara County. We touched on this area and maybe even this spot a bit in episode 34 about the Condor Trail. So if you want to hear about a really big adventure in this area, check that episode out. This is the southern section of the Los Padres National Forest. That national forest, if you recall from episode 34, has been divided into 2 sections that aren't connected. This is in the southern part. It's also within a designated wilderness, the San Rafael Wilderness. And this is about an hour-and-a-half drive from Goleta or Santa Barbara. The Lower Manzana Trail is a really popular backcountry trailhead. And the hike is basically about 9 miles down Manzana Creek. You're really going to get wet on this hike. My son and I went in early May, and although most of the crossings were easy, there were a few that were a bit tricky. I think we crossed the river something like 25 times each way. So this is a lot of time spent in the river, which is pretty cool. It's actually a pretty fun thing to do. The river crossings really made this an adventure and not just a hike. Though I guess that could vary widely depending on the season. The water levels could be vastly different. It's probably best as a spring or a fall hike, probably pretty hot in this area in the summer. One thing that's pretty cool is there are 3 other camp areas spread out every few miles before you get to the schoolhouse area. So you don't have to hike the whole way. And the route can accommodate lots of abilities and ages because of that. And all the camps are along Manzana Creek, which is pretty cool. It's downhill at the beginning, but then gets to be a pretty easy grade the rest of the way following the creek. And yes, as the name implies, there is a schoolhouse. You get to the end of the trail where the camp area is, and the schoolhouse is up on a mesa. It was built in 1896 for children of homesteaders in the area, and even at one point had up to about 25 kids attending, but was only used for a few years before people left the area because it was too rough and remote to farm there. The schoolhouse has been restored and is a historical monument and is still up there, as I mentioned. It's actually at the junction of Manzana Creek and the Sisquoc River, which is where the camp area is. So even though it was May, we got rained on in the evening, but it was otherwise pleasant. And my son Justin and I really enjoyed our single night out at the Manzana Schoolhouse. We saw some garter snakes and a turtle in the creek. And strangely, I got some of the best sleep I'd had in a long time. So who knows? Go figure. So there you have it. The Manzana Schoolhouse hike in the San Rafael Wilderness is a great overnight or weekend trip in Southern California, and our inaugural featured mini adventure. I will post some photos from the hike eventually on the Instagram account. So tell me about your favorite mini adventure, and maybe I will feature it on a future episode. Before we jump into the main hike for this episode, I want to tell you about a new promotion from our sponsor, Outdoor Herbivore. We've ended our previous promotion, and the prior discount code is no longer in effect. But we are doing our second annual version of the Trails Worth Hiking meal kit. Last year, I think we had a meal kit that included 3 of my favorite hot dinners. This year, we're going to do it a little different. But before I jump into the specifics of the meal kit, let me remind you that Outdoor Herbivore makes delicious vegetarian and vegan backpacking meals. But as I always say, you don't need to be a vegetarian or vegan to enjoy them. They're delicious. They have high quality ingredients. They have lots of calories. They're packaged efficiently. You can boil them in a bag to easily prepare meals on the trail. And they ship worldwide. So even if you're outside the United States, you can enjoy Outdoor Herbivore backpacking meals. All right, so here's what we're going to do for the Trails Worth Hiking meal kit this year for this limited time offer. We are going to give you a full day of meals. In other words, a breakfast, a lunch, and a dinner. So if you were doing a trip like I just described that I did with my son Justin, you could wake up at home, drive to the trailhead, hike for a couple hours, have your lunch, hike until your camp, set up camp, have your dinner, and then the next morning have your breakfast before you hike out. So it's great for a short mini adventure like we just described to get a full day of meals. The breakfast is the toasted sunburst muesli. And this is a pretty delicious version of what I would basically make at home as my oatmeal with some added nuts and seeds and things like that and dried fruit to make it a little bit more hearty and a really enjoyable breakfast. The lunch is Mojo Mango Bowl, which is a quinoa dish. And this is really cool because you can cold soak it. So you don't have to take out your stove for lunch. You just put I think it's just a half cup of water and you soak the lunch. And after 5 minutes, you get in there, you stir it up and you eat it. And it's absolutely delicious. It has mango chunks. It's got black bean flakes. It's got a little spicy kick to it. It's a really delicious meal. And I've really enjoyed that one. And then dinner, we're going to go back to my long-standing favorite, the chickpea sesame ziti, which is a delicious, creamy, sort of cheesy-like, even though it's a vegan dish, cheesy-like pasta dish. The total price for the Trails Worth Hiking full day of meals is $27.99, which is a pretty decent discount off the regular price. So go to Outdoor Herbivore right now and order your Trails Worth Hiking 2024 meal kit. And you'll have a full day of meals that you will be very happy with, that are very delicious and very healthy to boot. Of course, you might want to supplement with snacks, but you will have your 3 main meals taken care of. So please support our sponsor at outdoorherbivore.com. And that offer is only for a limited time, probably just until our next episode. So please act now. You don't have to use a discount code. You just go to Outdoor Herbivore and order the Trails Worth Hiking meal kit, and the discounted price is already set up for you. All right, let's talk about this episode. First, let's preview our guests. We have 2 amazing guests on this episode. That's right, 2 guests. First, it's listener Wade Tonkin, who has a pretty inspiring story about his trek to Everest Base Camp and will fill us in on all the details of the hike. But you will also hear excerpts from a conversation I had with comedian Sean Keane, who also recently hiked the Everest Base Camp trek. And not only did Sean hike to Everest Base Camp, he also did live stand-up comedy in a bar in one of the towns he hiked through during the trek. He'll tell us about that. And if you stay until the very end of the episode, you'll even hear a few excerpts of that performance that he did during his Everest Base Camp trek. I'm really excited that we're going back to Nepal on this episode. Nepal is one of the world's premier trekking destinations. I love the time that I spent in Nepal in 2019 and hope to feature eventually many of the amazing treks that Nepal has to offer. It's hard to pass up the opportunity to talk about the Everest Base Camp trek, which is one of Nepal's most popular and iconic treks. So let's jump into it. For background on Nepal and Kathmandu, its capital, please listen to episode 15. And for information more generally on trekking in Nepal, check out episode 14, where I interviewed Rajan Simkata, the owner of Earthbound Expeditions, which is the trekking company I used in Nepal, and which I highly recommend you use if you trek in Nepal. But with that said, the short version of what Nepal is all about is that it is a mountainous country in the Himalayas, sandwiched between India and China. It has endless trekking and climbing opportunities of every kind. Nepal consists of dozens of distinct ethnic groups that are often isolated by the mountainous terrain, and thus many have very distinct cultures, languages, religions, and histories. One thing that I talk about with my guests in this episode, and that I think I even mentioned in the intro, is dal bhat. Dal bhat really just means rice and lentils, but it is a traditional Nepali dish, and it's something that I ate every day trekking in Nepal for lunch. And it's a fantastic dish, and every village and every hotel and restaurant cooks it a little bit differently, and it's always cooked fresh. It comes with a potato curry in addition to the rice and black lentils, and it comes with usually a chutney, kind of a salsa. It's just an absolutely delicious, hearty meal. And that is one of my favorite things about Nepal is the food, and particularly the dal bhat. But I just wanted to mention that since we talk about it quite a bit in the interviews. Kathmandu is the capital city of Nepal, where you can see the Nepali melting pot of cultures all in one place, mixed with Western hikers, climbers, spiritual seekers, burnouts, and backpackers. In summary, for someone like me, despite its poverty, which is an overwhelming problem, Nepal is a fascinating and alluring place with wonderful people and scenery and culture. So how's that for a quick tour of Nepal? As I said, there's more information in the episodes I mentioned before, if you want to dive a little deeper. Now let's talk about Mount Everest. Mount Everest is the Earth's highest mountain above sea level. It's 29,031 feet, or 8,849 meters high, and still rising. The Himalayas rise about 5 millimeters a year as the Indian subcontinent continues crashing into Asia. The Himalayas are a mix of several types of rock, but most remarkable is that one of the types of rock found at the top of Everest is fossiliferous marine limestone. That's right. In other words, the highest rocks on Earth are partly composed of what was originally ocean seafloor. Ponder that one for a while. Mount Everest is not the tallest mountain from base to summit, and not the furthest away from the center of the Earth, but it is the highest in elevation above sea level. The highest from base to summit is Mauna Kea in Hawaii, but over half of that mountain is below sea level, in other words, underwater. And Mount Chimborazo in Ecuador is the furthest point away from the center of the Earth, even though it's not the tallest in elevation. And that's because it is in Ecuador by the equator, and the Earth bulges at the equator. So there you go. There are other mountains that can make similar claims for different reasons. The Nepali name for Everest is Sagarmatha, which means the head in the sky. The Tibetan name is Kwomo, which means Holy Mother. The British named it Mount Everest after the British surveyor George Everest. The surveyor who named it actually had wanted to use a local name, but couldn't find agreement on what the local name would be, owing to all the various cultures and languages in the area that had names for it. And Everest himself opposed the name. And interestingly, he pronounced his name Everest, so I guess I should say Everest opposed the name. But Mount Everest it is today. Climbing Everest has been an endeavor for quite a while. The summit of Everest is on the Nepal-China border, and so there are two main routes to the summit. There's the standard route from Nepal, and that is where the Everest Base Camp that we have all heard about is, and where this trek goes to. Amazingly, these days, you can actually drive to the Chinese base camp on the other side of the mountain in Tibet. But let's talk about the Nepali route and go back in time a bit, because the first ascents of Everest came on the Nepali side of the mountain. The first possible ascent was George Mallory and Andrew Irvine in 1924, but they died on the way down, and it is still unknown whether they actually reached the summit or not. They may have simply just turned back before they got to the summit. And I don't know about you, but I guess in my book, mountain climbing is a round-trip endeavor, so I personally wouldn't want to encourage first ascents that don't include descents. So the first verified team to reach the summit and return alive is, of course, in 1953, Sir Edmund Hillary of New Zealand, and Tenzing Norgay of Sherpa ethnicity, who was born in Tibet, lived in Nepal, and later had Indian citizenship. The first reported summit from the Tibetan side was in 1960. As of May 2024, 340 people had died climbing Everest. And due to the difficulty of removing bodies from this harsh environment, approximately 200 of them are still up there. When we think of Tenzing Norgay and climbing Everest, we think of Sherpas. In fact, for most people who've never trekked or climbed in Nepal, Sherpa simply means a porter, someone who carries your gear. But Sherpa doesn't actually mean a porter, it's an ethnic group. So who are the Sherpas? The name comes from two Tibetan words, shar and pa, which mean east and people. In other words, Sherpa simply means the people from the east. And the name is apt because it's believed that the Sherpas were originally from eastern Tibet and migrated to Nepal. Today, they primarily live in eastern Nepal in the Khumbu region near Mount Everest. There are about 150,000 Sherpas total in the world. They speak their own language, which is related to Tibetan. Sherpas are Buddhists. It's theorized that religious oppression of Buddhists in the 13th and 14th centuries may have caused Sherpas to migrate from Tibet to Nepal. They were originally herders and farmers, but they're known for their abilities to perform physically very well at high altitude, carrying heavy loads and hiking long distances very quickly. Sherpas hold many climbing records, including speed records climbing Everest and the record for the most ascents of Everest. And indeed, genetic testing has found a number of markers evidencing genetic adaptation to altitude in Sherpas. Essentially, they're just more efficient than the rest of us at using oxygen. So there you have it. The super athlete, Buddhist, multilingual, industrious, entrepreneurial mountaineers of the Nepali Himalayas, the Sherpas. Let's talk about Everest Base Camp. The South Base Camp, the one in Nepal, not the one you can drive to on a paved road in Tibet, is at 5,364 meters or 17,598 feet in elevation. The camp is on the Khumbu Glacier, which is the world's highest elevation glacier. In 2022, the camp was actually moved a few hundred meters because the portion of the glacier the camp had been on had become too dangerous due to climate change because it was melting and thinning on that part of the glacier. As the name implies, the base camp is where climbers set up a temporary home to prepare to climb Everest. As you might imagine, there are base camps for lots of mountains, both in the Himalayas and around the world. But Everest Base Camp is no doubt the most famous. Over the years, the base camp has gotten more crowded and also more substantial, with more amenities during the climbing season, and has also had more partying and more trash, though there are efforts to clean it up. The climbing season is in the spring, in May primarily, so that's when it's most active. Wade, our first guest, was there in October when it was empty, but Sean was there in May and had a very different experience, so we'll hear a couple of different perspectives on this. During climbing season, there can be hundreds of people, some of them doing some pretty high-end glamping as they wait for their climb to the summit to happen. One notable event is the massive April 2015 earthquake in Nepal. Among many other tragedies of that earthquake, it triggered an avalanche on Everest that killed 19 people in the base camp. All of this area is part of Sagarmatha National Park, which Nepal established in 1976. The national park in the area has more than 200 bird species, including pheasant and vultures. There's also tar and serow, which are both a goat-like species, and musk deer, and yes, there are snow leopards as well. So with that background, let's jump into my conversation with Wade Tonkin about his trek to Everest Base Camp. Wade Tonkin, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So we're going to talk about hiking and trekking in Nepal, and in particular the Everest Base Camp trek, which is a pretty big one. What is your background in hiking and trekking before doing this trek?
It's actually pretty minimal, and it's crazy because I was in scouts when I was a kid. Never did a 50 miler. Did a little bit of backpacking. Did a lot of overnighters and stuff like that, but never really did any like hardcore backpacking. And the way that this one kind of came about is I got really sedentary and really overweight. I was up to about 360 pounds, and
Wait, can I stop you? I want to stop you
yeah,
right
yeah,
there
yeah.
because people can't see you and I can because we're on, because we're recording audio. You are nowhere near 360 pounds right now.
About 260 now, so but
Wow.
like really athletic 260. So and it just the whole thing came about because I started getting into fitness and running and Orange Theory, and I lost a bunch of weight. We came up on the whole COVID shutdown. My Orange Theory gym shut down because obviously you can't be in there breathing all over people and COVID. And so I got really dedicated to my fitness effort, did a lot of trail running because I figured safest thing I can do. I'm asthmatic. Figured the safest thing I can do is be out running in the woods and hiking. So I did a lot of that. And then as we were coming out of COVID in like kind of late 2020, I started to think about doing something crazy because probably like a lot of other people, sitting around in the house, not really hanging out with a lot of other people, just wanted to do something kind of crazy and dramatic. And so I started thinking about what I could do and started kicking ideas around with friends and came across a YouTube series from a couple called Kara and Nate that were traveling around the world and just going to all these crazy places. And one of the series they did was hiking to Everest Base Camp. And so that kind of kicked off the idea, started trying to round up people, and there's a whole story around that we can get to. But yeah, that's kind of how the whole thing came about. But I had no hiking experience before I did this.
And so you had no history of ever going to somewhere like Nepal before either.
Nope. Yeah, first time in Nepal, and it just seemed like this crazy, amazing thing to do to kind of celebrate coming out of COVID and celebrate the weight loss.
Okay, so you now identify this hike through seeing things online. What did you do to figure out how to go do this?
Well, the first thing I did was started talking to some friends about it, and I had a crew of people from the industry that I work in, and some guys I hang out with a lot and see at conferences all the time. We were all kind of feeling similar. We really wanted to get out and do something kind of big and dramatic. Life popped up, and one by one, that crowd started falling aside. One of them ended up with his wife pregnant. The other one got really bad COVID and ended up kind of down for the count for quite a while. And it's crazy for him because he lives in Colorado, so he lives at elevation and was dealing with that. Actually has a weekend cabin up in Breckenridge, but he was really struggling. And another one just got too busy, so I actually had a day where I was like, you know what, the hell with it. I'm just going to put this out there and see what happens. So I jumped on Facebook. I said, I got this crazy idea. I want to do this. I'm in. I mean, like I booked my flight. I started looking around and getting a feel for, what kind of guide services to work with and stuff like that. I said, I'm in, who's going to join me? And then one by one, I had one of my guy I used to do radio with back in college. He's a big snowboarder, had climbed all the mountains in Washington State except for Mount Rainier. And the only reason he didn't climb that one is because they wouldn't let him ride down on a snowboard. And he's like, why the hell am I going to climb a mountain if I can't ride down it? That doesn't make any sense. His girlfriend got in touch with me out of nowhere, just saw it on Facebook and said, hey, Greg's in. He wants to go. He's wanted to do this his whole life. And so he got with me the next day and was like, I want to book this. What do we do? And so there's two of us. And my thing is I wanted to do a private trip. I didn't want to go with a big group. I wanted to get a group of people together. I could set my own itinerary. We could do it at our pace. We could kind of go with the flow on it and just have it be like a cool guide trip. And, I kind of kept waiting. And then a couple other, guys I work with popped up and were like, hey, this sounds pretty cool. Let's do this. And one of them that I work with is also another director. I worked at fanatics.com. And another one of our directors popped up. He's like, well, hey, I kind of like to do this, but I don't think our boss would let us both be gone at the same time. And so I actually brought it up in a staff meeting. I'm like, well, hey, I'm doing this Everest thing. Matt wants to go too, but he's afraid you won't let him. And the cool thing is the guys I was working for at the time were both hikers and trail runners. And he's like, I would never in a million years stop somebody from doing that. He's like, if I could go, I would go with you.
Nice strategy, though, to go with the public shaming option if they were to say no. I love that in front of other people.
Yeah, it worked. So, in the end, it was a bold move, but it played out pretty well.
So what was the final group? How many people?
There's four of us, and three of us that worked together, and then one guy that I knew from college.
Okay, cool. And okay, so now I have to ask because you packaged this together with another trek on the same trip?
It was actually ended up being just a side trip because
Okay.
when I watched the original series that kind of inspired me, they took a side hike up to Amadablam Base Camp, and Amadablam, it's about 25,000 feet. It's not nearly as high as Everest, but it is a stunning, stunning mountain. It looks like the Matterhorn. It's kind of that style of the mountain, but it's just absolutely gorgeous. And I figured, hey, why not go and throw that on as well? It's pretty much on the way. It's just like a site. You go across the river at Pangboche and way up, like way, way up. And you're there. And the way that it worked out, it actually ended up being one of our acclimatization hikes because we had to modify our schedule a little bit. And so ended up just throwing that one in as well and picking up another 1,900 feet or something like that of vertical.
That's cool. So you started with having never done anything like this, and you sort of throw on a little extra just to make sure that it's challenging.
Yeah, and it turned out to be. We were right. It was super challenging. It was one of the craziest things we've ever done.
All right. So the season that I understand for doing these kinds of hikes, when I did the Manaslu trek, was basically spring or fall. Is that the same season in eastern Nepal where the Everest region is?
Yeah, the best times are before the monsoon and after the monsoon. And so we went in October. That's shifting a little bit with climate change. They're seeing the monsoons are hanging out a little bit into October in a lot of cases. And so we had set it up. I just had to wait for September 30th to leave because my wife's birthday is on September 30th, and I wasn't going to dive out on her birthday to go run off for 4 weeks and go to Nepal. So we actually flew out on October 1st, and we were hoping we would nail the weather because Everest is a very weather-dependent trek. Because if you can't fly into Lukla, or if you can't fly out of Lukla, you're stuck. And so we were kind of rolling the dice and hoping that if, it takes us a couple days for everybody to get in, hoping that the weather would be great, we could just go and get on the route. It didn't quite work out that way.
So how long of a trek is the Everest trek in distance?
All total, our route was about 76 miles.
Okay.
Up and back, but that also includes, there's always going to be some little side hikes for your acclimatization, whether you do that in Dingboche or whether you do what we did and kick off over to Amadablam Base Camp. But around 76 miles.
How many days was the on-trail part of the trip, including acclimatization, if you had 0 days?
Yeah, it was 11 days. Because even the acclimatization days, people call them rest days, but they're not. They're right. Really, really not. I mean, you're going up higher. In a lot of cases, you're doing, pretty steep, pretty rugged hikes. But the whole thing is you're trying to kind of mess with your body a little bit, fool your system, and go up high. Your body produces more red blood cells, come back down, sleep lower, and then you're able to move forward.
So this is essentially an out and back type of hike with your side trips included, right?
Yeah, and there's some different ways you can do it. I mean, if we would have done like Gokyo Lakes or 3 passes, there's some twist you can add to it, so you're not just going up and coming back. You're actually kind of making like a lollipop out of it. But in this case, we decided to keep it simple. None of us were sure how we would do with elevation. And when you're throwing on, some other, 5,400, 5,500 meter passes, it can definitely feel a little bit intimidating. Looking back, I wish I would have, probably wish I would have gone and done like Gokyo or something like that, because there's some pretty amazing scenery and just, seeing different stuff the second, on the way back or on the way up there, depending on how you route it, is kind of a cool thing.
So how many days up versus back? I would imagine the majority of the days are the climbing, and that it's probably a little bit easier getting out.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's easier necessarily, but we were about 9 days up and about 2.5 back.
Well, quicker. It's at least quicker.
It's quicker because it's going up is like a long grind because you're going slow because you're trying to acclimatize. You're not breaking off massive distances. On the way back, essentially, you're just tearing ass down the mountain trying to get off as fast as you can.
Okay, and what's the elevation range? How low do you start, and what is the elevation when you finally get to base camp?
Starting elevation on it in Lukla, let's see here, it was about 9,383 feet.
Okay.
And the highest point was about 18,500.
And you have to fly from Kathmandu to Lukla.
Yeah, and depending on the time of year, now they've started to change. So like in the peak seasons, they're actually flying out of Ramachop, which is, it's about a 5 hour, I think, bus ride from Kathmandu, but it's a lot closer. So you get a shorter flight. And so in a lot of cases, they're able to get there a little, in and out a little bit more effectively. And the biggest thing that they're trying to do is take down the traffic at the Kathmandu airport, because it's a crazy, crazy busy airport for that time of year. And when you get a bunch of people stuck there, it's really not fun. Yeah, and Ramachop's kind of challenging because there's not a whole lot there. There's like an airport, but they don't have the infrastructure there yet in terms of like the hotels and shops and stuff like that. So if you get stuck there, it's not super amazing either.
So what did you carry on the hike?
We had porters, and so you've got your choice. A lot of the hardcore backpackers like to do it themselves, which I totally get if that's what you're used to and you're in good shape and you're good at and you're a big lightweight backpacker. If that's your style, it's a pretty good way to go. We were a bunch of middle-aged dudes that were not necessarily super athletic. And so we were like, we gotta give ourselves every advantage we can. So we had a guide. We had two porters, because we had four of us. So each porter would carry bags for two people. I think you had a limit on your bag of about like 13 or 14 kilograms for what they would carry for you. And in our day packs, we were just carrying essentially layers, maybe some snacks, water, cameras. So we were carrying pretty light. But I mean, as you get higher up in elevation, even 8 or 9 pounds can make a world of difference.
Yeah, I mean, I am a lightweight backpacker, but one way to be really light, especially in Nepal, is to have a porter.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what I did when I was there too.
Yeah, and in the end, I mean, when you think about it, you're giving a local a job. You're making the economy go, and those dudes are machines. I mean, I was super blown away because they're not big people. They tend to be pretty small, but they can carry amazing amounts of weight, and it's kind of funny because like the commercial porters that you see, if you've ever watched any videos, you'll see these guys lugging around like a full sofa or something, or multiple mattresses or boards or construction materials. And these guys are like 130, 140 pounds, and they're carrying 200 pounds of stuff on their back. And before we flew out of the airport, the first day we went to the airport, we couldn't get out. We sat in the domestic terminal at Kathmandu Airport for 7 hours. And one of our guys had a little bit of a tighter window on timelines. And so we were kind of getting a little bit stressed because we had this thing laid out so that we could do kind of a traditional kind of a route, and we'd be able to get up there and back and have no problems with that. But after that day, we started talking to our guide and saying, well, hey, we probably need to look at getting a helicopter up there if it's going to be like this, because we need to get on the route. We need to get hiking. And so they said, yeah, we'll line that up. It's cool. Let's circle back a little bit. The company that I went with, called Everest, I had a chance to catch up with Rick, who runs the thing. I did a little bit of a shakedown hike in Colorado about 4 or 5 weeks before. Went up to about 13,500 feet just to make sure that my Florida-based body would not totally crumble under the elevation. And had a chance to sit down with him and kind of talk about strategy and stuff like that. And it turned out being really cool because he was partnered at that point with, I don't know if you've heard of NIMS, guy from the 14 Peaks movie.
Okay. No, I haven't.
So everybody needs to check out 14 Peaks. NIMS at the time was the record holder for being the quickest person to climb all 14 8,000-foot peaks.
Okay.
He's a former British Gurkha soldier, and now he's just mountain climber, thrill seeker, runs an expedition company. Hat that I'm wearing right now, it's the Elite Exped hat. But Rick from iTrek was partnered with these guys to handle logistics and porters and guides and stuff like that in Nepal. And so when we set up the trip through Rick, they had everything lined up. Essentially, they gave us a packing list. When we got there, had the guys come pick us up, the whole thing, get us to our hotel, run us through all the briefings, take us out shopping. And so the cool thing is, if you work with an expedition company, those guys will take care of all the details for you and walk through it. It's possible to just fly into Kathmandu, go into Tamel, which is the trekkers district, and there's all kinds of people out there hustling to try to get you to take them out on the trek. However, there's good, there's bad. You don't know how well they're going to treat their porters. Don't know whether they're going to make sure they have good gear, have insurance, stuff like that. We were all super cautious of that. We wanted to work with somebody that handled that stuff for us and did it right. I discovered Rick through the videos that I was watching. I reached out to him, said, "Hey, saw you guys on Kara and Nate. We want to do that trip." And so at that point, it was on. So we get there. First day, we can't fly out. Second day, we're going to get the helicopter. Meanwhile, they're like waiting for that to become available. And they said, "Yeah, we got a surprise for you. We're going to have a guy come down and visit that we think you guys are going to like to meet, because a couple of us are really into mountaineering and kind of following mountaineering history." And they had a guy named Nyingma David Sherpa, he's now climbed K2 6 times.
Wow.
He was the youngest man to climb all 14 8,000 foot peaks. And he came down and had breakfast with us. And
cool.
I've got a picture with him. And in the movie, Nims refers to him as the strongest man pound for pound that he knows. Dude comes up to about my chest. And he probably weighs about 130, but he could probably carry me up the mountain. And so that was we were all jazzed at that point, because we met this guy that's a legend. And from there, they took us to the airport. We go, they get us on the helicopter, and absolutely epic experience. We had a pilot that had been trained in the U.S. Air Force. The guy was like, "I don't know if I can get you there. Weather's pretty sketchy, pretty cloudy. You're flying through these mountain valleys. You got all these cool terraced fields and farms and stuff like that." We actually came up over a ridge. We could see that there was just a hole in the clouds. It was like a little bit bigger than the helicopter. He's like, "If I can get through this, we can get you there." Popped up through the hole, popped down, and then Lukla Airport is in front of us.
Wow.
We didn't get the climactic landing at Lukla because you're in a helicopter, so you just set down. You don't get the whole landing on the short runway and the kind of pucker factor with that. But it was amazing. I mean, the views were incredible, and we got some pretty cool video of that. And from there, you're on the route, which is super cool. And we started off with our first meal in the first tea house lodge. Got the first dalbat, which honestly, I don't. What are your thoughts on dalbat?
I ate it every day for lunch, and I could continue to eat it every day for lunch probably the rest of my life if I was trekking.
I'm the same. And we probably had 14 different dalbats, all of them a little bit different, but all of them brilliant. It was all good.
Yeah, they're all a little different. That's what's cool about it. They're all homemade, essentially.
Yeah, so that was essentially day one. We did the hike into Phakding, which is about 3 hours. And they don't measure stuff in miles there. It's all hours. It's just like hours trekking.
Right.
And that, your guide's accuracy, there may be some BS factor to it sometimes if he's kind of trying to guide you along. But the way that area was laid out, it felt a lot like Leavenworth or, kind of northwestern Washington, kind of narrow, mountain river valleys. And it was gorgeous. I mean, it's absolutely beautiful country. And that's kind of one of the things that makes me want to go back. I'm a mountain kid. I grew up in Washington State. I live in Florida now. I don't get my mountain fix. And so it was just absolutely cool from minute one. Once we got on the route, the views of the mountains around us were just incredible.
What did you think of the tea house experience, the day-to-day staying in the tea houses?
I think it varies. I mean, there's some that are obviously better than others. And I think we caught a little bit of a different experience because we were coming in, we were actually some of the first trekkers that were in there after they reopened for COVID. Because, once we'd booked in, the waiting period that we would have to stay in Kathmandu before getting released on the route went from 7 days to 4 days to, hey, if you're coming from the West, if you've got money and you're COVID negative, knock yourself out, man. Welcome to the country, get out and go. And so we had built a lot of slop into our schedule for the most part, and probably almost like an extra week because we didn't know if we were going to you have to book it out in advance a little bit for the flights. And so we didn't know, how that was going to go, but so that not all of them were reopened. And a lot of kind of what you end up in is kind of based on relationships with your guide, because in a lot of cases, guides put you up in their family places and stuff like that. But the first one in Phakding was okay as far as kind of comfort and all that. Our room actually had an ensuite bathroom, had a shower cold, but we weren't really super worried about the shower at that point, so we didn't worry about it. But the food, I mean, their dining room was great. Food was really good. And we actually had a few people in that lodge with us, which was kind of unusual for a lot of the rest of the stay on the way up. We actually ended up being on our own, just our party and our tea house for a lot of the stops.
That is really unusual on this particular trek because the Everest Base Camp trek is one of the most developed in Nepal.
Yeah.
It has some of the most developed tea houses and accommodations. I mean, just mentioning that you had an in-suite bathroom, I can tell you on Manaslu, there was nothing like that.
Yeah.
You were basically in a little wooden box and there was maybe, a bathroom outside.
And a lot of the rooms are like that. I mean, it's plywood box with a couple foam mattresses, maybe
Yep.
a table. If you're lucky, power plugs to charge with. Sometimes they'll have Wi-Fi. You'll always have my Wi-Fi in the kind of the common room, but how far it goes out of there, who knows? I was trying not to be online all the time. I had the SIM card for the local service, and so I actually had pretty good connectivity a lot of the way up. But there was a few days when I think they had a tower down or something like that where we didn't have connections. But the thing that really blew me away, I actually had like 4 bars on top of Kalapatar
Oh, wow.
at 18,000 feet, which blew my mind because I'm like, this of all places, I have a connection. But back there I didn't.
So tell me about what this hike looks like scenery-wise going as you're climbing. How does it change? What does it look like? What's the terrain like?
Yeah, and it changes dramatically because when you're in like Lukla, it's kind of temperate rainforest almost. Feels very Washingtonian. I mean, it's very like the Cascades. And so when we were walking in there, it was lots of kind of conifer trees, steep mountain valleys, kind of rocky. It was actually kind of drizzly the first day that we were walking in, and the walk from Lukla down to Fakting is downhill, which at the time you're doing it, you're like, oh wow, this is great, this is easy. But then you remember that on the way back out, it's going to be uphill.
Yeah.
Next day is a longer steep hike when you're going up to Namche Bazaar, which to me was like one of the most memorable days because you get to see some of the really iconic stuff. We had kind of an interesting twist. We had just started out of Fakting, headed towards Namche, and our guide stopped us, and he saw a Westerner turning up the wrong trail, and he tried to call out to this guy to stop him, and the guy couldn't hear him. So he puts down his backpack and tells us, just go ahead, I'll catch up. And he goes off running up the hill, and we're thinking, wow, walking right now is kind of challenging, and this guy's just running like it was nothing. But he grew up at 15,000 feet. And he lives at like 14,000. So for him, we were below sea level for this guy. So he just went up, caught the guy, came back, caught up with us. We had one section where the trail had washed out and they were doing trail construction. Nepalese can build and rebuild a trail like you wouldn't believe. But in the meantime, they had us go down this crazy route almost all the way down to the river. And yaks were going down. They're zos. I mean, they're yak cow hybrids. But they were... these pack animals are going down the same trail, and it makes it ridiculous because you have these chunked up spots and slippery spots. On the way back, when we came back through, it was all cleaned up, and you never thought anything had happened. But the first part of the hike to Namche is pretty much a little bit up and down. It's kind of Nepali flat, what they call it, a little bit up, a little bit down, a little bit up, a little bit down.
Yeah, so talk about that, Nepali flat. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, so there's a flat that Westerners think of, which is actually flat, like Florida. There's Nepali flat, which is a little bit up, a little bit down, pretty much constantly, over and over again until infinity. And then there's Sherpa flat. And Sherpa flat is like 45-degree angle-ish up.
Yeah, and they don't change. I mean, for them, they can hike that just like it is flat.
No, yeah, they just kind of chill through it, and it's pretty amazing because you watch them as you go along on the track, and just the speed of operation of life is different.
Right.
There's no reason to move fast, and that's one of the that's something that I really took out of it is like just slow down and enjoy the thing, and that's kind of the key to the hike because they say that a lot of the people that actually have problems with the elevation, they're actually the young fit guys who come in and they think they've got this, they're in great shape. So they just go tearing up the trail and they don't let their bodies adjust. And, those of us who are a little bit older, we like to enjoy the rock. We like to shoot some video. We like to take some pictures and just hang out. And so that slower process of the trail helps the acclimatization. So, got done with the first part of the hike. It's relatively flat on that section. And then you get to the iconic Hillary suspension bridge, which is absolute mind blower. The trail going up to that is steep because you pick up about 300 feet to get up to it. And then, we were walking across it and one of my buddies kept stopping and asking the guide questions in front of me. And it was starting to drive me nuts. I'm not bad with heights, but like in this case, you're looking 300 feet down through the slats on this bridge going, that's a long way. I would have time to think about that if I fell. That's just not cool. So I'm like, dude, you're going to get a closer view of the river if you keep asking questions. Just keep moving. But from there, it's up. I mean, you pick up all the last 2 hours into Namche. I think you gain almost 2,000 feet. And so it's like 2 miles, 2,000 feet of gain. It's up and it's technical, and it's a crazy hike. But when you come around that corner and you see Namche Bazaar open up in front of you on the side of the hill, it's pretty amazing.
So I assume that all the porters and guides in this region are all Sherpa?
There's a couple other ethnic groups that are in there. Most of the tea house operators are definitely Sherpa. A lot of the guides are Sherpas. A lot of the mountain guides are Sherpas. But people use that Sherpa term. A lot of people use Sherpa when they mean porter, and it's a different deal. It's like an ethnic group. They're people from the east. They're Tibetan, ethnically Tibetan, but the coolest people in the world. I mean, super generous, super cheerful, friendly. They're great. I mean, they're industrious business people, man. I mean, those guys hustle when they're running their tea houses and they're doing some farming. Because the cool thing is that when you're eating in these tea houses, most of the stuff that they're serving up, like the vegetables and stuff like that, they're growing just outside the door. I mean, so it's all organic. It's the best produce you're going to get.
I remember ordering mint tea and watching the lady go out the back door and pick the mint. Put it in my tea.
I've got a picture of a cup of mint tea where it's just like big mint leaf sitting in the middle of my glass. I'm like, it doesn't really get more authentic than that. Really, can't complain.
How many hours a day are you actually on the trail hiking?
Depending on the day, it could be 2 or 3, or it could be, on the way back down, we did like, I think a 9-hour and a 10-hour. I mean, on the way down is rough, but on the way up, you're really trying to manage that elevation gain. So in a lot of cases, it might be 2 to 5 hours, and then you're going really slow. You're not picking up a ton of mileage, along the way, because they're just really trying to help, trying to keep you slow and keep you acclimatizing. Distance wise, I mean, the first day was 7.5K, second day was 9.4. So another 5, another 9, another 3.1K day. Pangbo Che to Ferry Che was about 13K. So that was a long one. But yeah, generally anywhere between 3 hours and 7 hours.
Right. Yeah. And that's what I remember is they'll space them out that way so that some days you have a really short day and it gives you more acclimatization.
Yeah.
And you might actually even do a side trip to sort of help you acclimatize and then come back down. So talk about that. So Namche Bazaar, by the way, how big of a town or area is that?
It is actually crazy big. I think there's like 1,500 permanent residents, but I mean there's probably 100 plus lodges. I mean it's big.
Yeah.
And there's so much stuff going on because you've got all these tea houses that are usually multi-story ones. You've got a blues bar, which we ended up in on the way back down. There's an Irish pub, which was pretty amazing as well. There is a music bar called the Hungry Yak. That's pretty amazing. The guy that runs that place is an absolute character. He's like the singer, does like metal covers and stuff. But so you could pretty much do everything there. There's a lot of shopping. There's an actual North Face store, not a North Fake, but a North Face. So an actual North Face store, a Sherpa adventure gear store there. So it's like it's a cool place if you're trekking or if you're climbing, because if you need to reload on anything, you need to buy anything, or something breaks or something like that, you can buy replacement gear or find some fleece, or buy down stuff or whatever you need.
So you guys crossed the Hillary suspension bridge, and now you're climbing.
Yep.
And you're going, is it basically just day after day at this point of climbing from little village to little village?
Yeah, and the cool thing is, like on the lower parts of it, the first probably 5 days, there's pretty much a tea house about every half mile. Mm-hmm. And then you'll have clusters where there's like an actual village where there might be 3 or 4. Mm-hmm. But so there's always a place to stop. And usually what we would do is we would get up in the morning, have breakfast. And usually the way that it works, you get into your tea house, you're committed to dinner and breakfast at that tea house. It's part of your deal. The stay is usually insanely cheap or free as long as you eat there. And then your meals are pretty cheap as well. I could start at $2 to $6. By the time you get to the top, it might be a little bit more expensive than that, because obviously everything's been carried up by somebody, including the fuel that they cook with. So, but yeah, you get up, have breakfast, trek for a couple hours, stop for a tea break, trek for a couple hours, maybe stop for lunch, trek for a couple hours, get to where you're going to be, and meanwhile you're just kind of enjoying the scenery. And it's pretty cool when you go with a group that whether you know them or not, you develop, it's a crazy bonding experience, because you're suffering through all this craziness together, and really kind of having a good time, just enjoying things, and propping each other up when it's getting rough. And it's a very cool experience. It was cool for the guys that work together. It was amazing for us because we were super tight from that point.
That's how you can justify it to your boss now. You can say, look, it brought us all together. We're a better team. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So talk about the Amadablam side trip. As you're climbing and climbing, you eventually do a veer off toward that base camp.
Yeah.
What was that like, and what did you see on that trip?
Yeah, and the day that we did that, most people, the way that they route the trip is they go from Tingboche, which is where the big monastery is that a lot of people have seen, and they'll go to Dingboche, which is a little bit longer hike. It's up on a hill. It's a little bit elevated. What we ended up doing is going from Tingboche to Pangboche, which is where our guide's family is from. His in-laws are from, and then we stopped there. It was only like 2 or 3 hours. It was a short hike to get there. And then we're like, okay, what are we doing today? And he's like, Amadablam Base Camp. You said you wanted to do it. We're going to do that. And we had chopped a day off our trip. So we were losing the acclimatization day, essentially. And so he's like, no, this is your acclimatization. That's cool. We'll do it. And so we go from about 13,000 feet up to 15,000. And essentially, you cross the river, and it's like 2.5 miles, and you're gaining 2,000 feet. It's another super steep, pretty sketchy climb for a lot of it. But the view was incredible. And it was funny because at one point, I'm a trail runner. That's my guilty pleasure. And at one point we saw a dude come by power hiking and just blasted past us like it was nothing. And then like 15 minutes later, he comes running down full speed. He was up there training for the Everest Marathon.
Oh, wow.
Where they run from base camp down to like Lukla. And so he was up there getting his altitude training in. But yeah, super steep. This is where we started to kind of feel the elevation. And we had one of our guys was starting to have some issues with it. There was, some people take Diamox. I don't know if you guys did any Diamox when you're on your trip. I had decided that I didn't want to do it. In a lot of cases, it seems like it's kind of tricky because a lot of the side effects of it kind of mimic what you're trying to avoid. And so I wanted to know what was going on. And so I decided to pass on it. One of our other guys, when we went out of Namche, we did our acclimatization day going up to the Everest View Hotel, and he decided he was going to take the Diamox then because he started to feel it. But he was a little bit anxiety prone, and then he started to feel the side effects of the Diamox and was like, okay, I don't like this at all. Took it once, never took it again.
Yeah.
Because he just didn't want to be sketched out, or if he was sketched out, he wanted to know why. So we were starting to feel it. It definitely is something where you start to feel your head buzzing a little bit. You start to get the headaches. Your appetite can get harder to sleep. And so one of our guys was really starting to feel this. And I think that after we did that acclimatization hike up to the Amadablam Base Camp, it really started to set him on a not great path. Because I think at that point, and his plan, he was originally going to go do the base camp hike with us. Then he was going to go climb Island Peak, which is like 20,000 feet. And so he had to be on top of his acclimatization more than any of us, but he was already starting to struggle at this point. And
wow.
So that's when things started to get a little tricky, and it made things challenging for our guide because, we got one guy that's not doing well. You got 3 of us that are hanging in pretty tight. We didn't have an assistant guide. We had 2 porters with pretty limited English. And so it started to become kind of an adventure to kind of keep the group together-ish, but make sure that we were getting to where we were supposed to go. And so the next day, we got up from Pangboche. Our guide took us to the monastery there, where he's actually had been a monk at Tingboche, and he's a member at Pangboche now. So he took us over to the monastery. They had like a little blessing ceremony for us. Showed us the Yeti hand and the Yeti skull that they have there, which was kind of fun, kind of fun, kitschy thing to do. And then he took us up to meet his in-laws, and they have a lodge there, and took us in for Tibetan tea. I don't know if you ever did any Tibetan tea on Manaslu, butter tea.
I don't think I had it, but I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, that one got kind of mixed reviews. Everybody tried it, but I like it. I mean, I'm like a bulletproof coffee guy.
I may have tasted it. I may have tasted it and been like, not for me.
Salty, buttery tea, not for everybody. Yeah. It is what it is. But then we went on to Feriche, which Feriche is where they have a high altitude clinic. Mm-hmm. We probably should have stopped in and had a talk with some people at that point, to be honest. But that was our favorite lodge of the whole trip. Turns out the sister-in-law of our guide runs the place.
Mm-hmm.
She had a espresso machine, like a full-size Lavazza espresso machine there. So we hadn't had coffee, like real coffee, for 4 or 5 days at that point. So when we showed up, we were pretty stoked. So we immediately ordered up our coffees. She let us put our music on the Bluetooth speaker system. Had great food. It's called Edelweiss Lodge. She had hot showers and she had laundry facilities.
Wow.
So we did. Yeah, she's got that thing hooked up, man. And so we were all super stoked to get a shower, wash some clothes, and just kind of recharge a little bit. But once again, we were totally by ourselves. We didn't have anybody else because most people at that point had gone up to Dingboche, and we went to Feriche instead. So just a little bit of a twist. And a lot of people, they'll go Dingboche on the way up, Feriche on the way down, just to kind of make it different. But because of the family relationship, and because I think also because we had gone pretty high the day before, I think our guide wanted to make sure that we didn't have a crazy gain to let us recover a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But from there is where it gets really steep and tough, because at that point you're at like 13,400 feet. I mean, it's as high as anything you're going to get in the U.S. pretty much, other than Rainier and Whitney. But at that point, you start to really feel the elevation. It gets trickier to sleep. I never had appetite issues. I was able to eat pretty much the whole way up, and I thought I ate pretty well. At one point, I was actually worried because I wasn't losing weight. I figured I was going to lose a bunch of weight, but we were eating well. And then I realized that when they wake you up in the morning, they bring you tea, and they bring you like sugar and honey with your tea, and then you have tea with breakfast, usually with honey or sugar. Then you have tea at your tea break, usually with honey. And I'm drinking like a half cup of honey a day. I'm probably not going to lose weight if I'm doing that. So, but I was able to, eat and drink the whole way up. Didn't really have a problem with that. But, Greg, our buddy that was having the issues with the elevation, was starting to really feel it. Wasn't sleeping well, wasn't able to keep things down too well. But, it's one of those things where, people that have thrown that kind of money into a trek, they want to press forward. And then, he looks back now. I was talking with him today about kind of what he was feeling and how that whole thing went. And he's like, man, realistically, I should have stopped at some point and just been like, okay, I'm going to take a day here, and then I'll catch up.
Right. You get target fixation, right? Where you think, I've got to do it. I put all this time and money and I came halfway across the world. How can I not do it?
Yeah. And so that's really tough, but it's something that, as other members of the group, you have to watch out for each other. And the guides, and that's I think it's one of the tough dilemmas that the guides get in, because the guides want you to be successful. And so they have to be willing to shut you down. But at the same time, they want to see you get up to the top, and they're making tips and stuff too. So, they realize they're going to do better if everybody gets there. But, Greg was really starting to struggle. And so it was, he's showing up like half hour, our guide was staying back with him. We were walking with the porters, and we just kept getting, maybe he'd be like 30 minutes behind us and not feeling good. Next day, we pushed on. We went up to Le Boucher. That was one of the coolest days of the hike, honestly. It was one of the hardest, and it was one of the ones that really tested me. One of the things that I found was that I was really fit when I went. I got myself down to 239 pounds. I was in the best shape I've been in as an adult. I was trail running. I was hiking. I was a beast. And that served me really well up to about 14,000 feet. Mm-hmm. And then at that point, lack of oxygen is lack of oxygen. It is what it is. And so what I found was that as long as I kept moving at a steady pace, I was good. If we stopped to get tea or if we stopped for lunch, restarting was a real pain, because your body is like, wait a minute, this isn't right. Something's not cool. Why is there no oxygen in this air that I'm breathing? And so you kind of start to panic breathe a little bit, and you can almost kind of work yourself into an anxiety attack. And so I just had to be like, slow myself down, be like, hey, let's take a second, take a breath, and then just keep moving slowly. And then everything would kind of get back to okay. And you just have to be committed to like, hey, I'm going to go one step at a time. Sometimes when you got up really high, it's, a couple breaths and a step. And it is what it is, but if you just keep going slow, you'll get there. But that piece of the hike has has Tukla Pass, which is where the monument hill is, where Scott Fisher and Rob Hall and the guys from Into Thin Air, where their memorials are, and all the people that have died on Everest. Mm-hmm. That's that for me was one of the mind-blowing moments on the trip. Number one, it's a very solemn spot. You've just come up a brutal hill. I think it's about 1,000-foot climb, just very zigzaggy, slow. You're already at 14,000 feet. You're gaining elevation like crazy. And our guide sent us up with the porters and said, okay, here's the deal. You follow their speed. Do not pass them. I don't care if you feel good. Bistadi, bistadi, slowly, slowly.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll get up there, you'll be fine. And so we just followed, grind out the hike, get up there, amazing view. It's an absolutely epic spot for a memorial. The view that you have in that spot is incredible. And then from there on, the whole look of everything changes because you're really at that point, it's like a moonscape. You're in like high alpine rocks, a little bit of scrub stuff, but there's not much in the way of plant life or animals or anything like that. It's just very, very stark rock, ice, snow.
And so do you all four make it to base camp?
We did. We didn't all get to base camp. We all got to Gorakshep, which is the village that you hike to either base camp or Kalapatar from.
Okay.
And so and that's at about 16,009 elevation wise. We all got there. We weren't sure Greg probably should have gone there, but he got there. When we arrived, our guide had told us, look, it's only like a 2-hour hike from Lobuche to Gorakshep. You're picking up some pretty good elevation. It's kind of boulder scrambly. It's a lot of glacial moraine, so it's very rocky. It's not an easy trail section because of the footing. You have to watch your footing, so you have to go kind of slow. But when we got there, he's like, just take it slow. When you get there, we'll have lunch, see how everybody feels. And from that point, you can either decide to go up Gorakshep and see go up Kalapatar, and you can see, the sunset or the sun starting to go down over Everest. Or we can go to base camp and then go up and do Kalapatar if everybody's feeling it in the morning. Now, when I was watching a lot of videos, everybody goes to Kalapatar in the morning because they want to see the sunrise over Everest. It's way cooler to see the sun set on the face of Everest and Nuptse and Lhotse in the afternoon. This was probably the toughest piece of the hike for me because we decided we felt great. I mean, we felt really good. We're like, yeah, let's go ahead and jam up Kalapatar. You don't jam up anything at 17,000 feet. You just very slowly slog. So our guide actually had us reduce like all that we wanted to take with us into one pack. He had the porter carry it, so we were carrying nothing because at that point, every ounce matters. And we just started the slow slog up. This is the first time that I ever thought that I was going to tap out because I got like 100 feet up Kalapatar. And it's just, if you look at pictures of it, it's like this big brownish black rock hill. Anywhere else at any other elevation, you'd be like, it's nothing. I can be up that in, 10, 15 minutes. But it takes 2.5 to 3 hours.
Yeah.
Because it's just that you're that high and there's 50% of the oxygen saturation we're used to. And so you just have to kind of grind it out. I got like 100 feet up this. And I was like, you know what? I think I'm good. I think I can turn around and go back. Because anxiety was off the charts. Because like I said, I'm asthmatic. My number one fear is not being able to breathe. And I was kind of panic breathing. And my buddies and my guide said, you know what? Let's chill for a minute. Think about it. Just relax, talk yourself down, and then we'll go take it a few more steps. Right. And I probably did that 2 or 3 times. The last time I did it, I was like 150 feet short of the top. It gets to like a big boulder field. And I'm like, okay, if you stop now, you were such a dickhead. There's no way I can turn that close to the top. There's no way. There's just no way. And so once we got to the top, it was absolutely worth it because the view you get, that's where you see Everest. Because most people don't realize that when you're at base camp, you're at 17,500 feet. Everest is just over 29,000. You can't see it. You can see like the very top of it, and it's behind Nuptse and Lhotse. And you can't really see Everest from base camp, but on Kalapatar, you can see a pretty good piece of the
So
summit.
you've actually got to climb a little bit higher to be able to see it.
So you go up like another 1,000 feet, and then you can actually see a lot of it. But once we got up there, we got some amazing views and amazing pictures. And coming down, I made a bit of a tactical error because, I like going downhill. I'm a trail runner. So I started going pretty quick. I wasn't running, but I was, once we got out of the boulder field, I was hiking pretty fast down and feeling pretty good about myself. And between Kalapatar and our lodges, there's like a dry lake bed that's perfectly flat. So I'm tearing across that, feeling pretty good. And then we get to like a 20-foot bank to go up to our hotel. And I start hiking up that. I'm just like, oh, Jesus, I can't do it. This is hard. And so you get totally blown up hiking up a 20-foot bank to get to your hotel. And our guide was like, yeah, you probably should have slowed down a little bit back there because you're still at 17,000
Right,
feet.
even going downhill.
You're still at elevation. But
right.
So at that point, we're in Gorakshep, right around 17,000 feet. Next day,
What is Gorakshep like?
it's probably one of the smaller villages because I think now there's probably maybe 6 or 7 lodges there. It's not fancy. I mean, I would say that like accommodation wise, it's probably kind of on the low end of the spectrum because at that point, it's not the cleanest, bathroom wise, and it's not the most comfortable, and it's tough. It's tough to sleep. I mean, it's tough because like a lot of the water buckets they use to flush the toilets will be frozen because it's cold.
Yeah.
17,000 feet. And I'd always read, all the reviews I read, they were saying like Lobuche and Gorakshep, the hotels were terrible. I think they're getting better, to be honest. I think they've probably built 3 or 4 more since I was there because they've been doing a lot of building on EBC, the route, the last few years since they've reopened for COVID. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty Spartan. I mean, it's essentially it's all about having a place to sleep and a place to eat. And then, turning around the next day and getting out of there as quickly as you can. But the next morning we got up, had breakfast. We were going to go ahead and press forward to base camp to wrap the thing up. Our guide stayed back with Greg because Greg was going to helicopter out. We'd gotten up, had a conversation, and he was not doing well. I mean, he was getting onset of high altitude pulmonary edema, which can be really, really dangerous.
Yeah.
And he was having these, like, even when you're breathing, you're not feeling like you're oxygenating,
right.
Not holding anything down, not sleeping, brain fogged, just, really having a rough time. And so we had arranged for a helicopter to come and take him out. It was a little tricky because it was a Nepali holiday that day. And so he actually ended up getting flown out by a Canadian pilot from just north of where we grew up. So we went up to base camp, did our thing with one of our porters, and had an amazing time. It was pretty cool because now I see the crowds that are up there and it's ridiculous, but we had it to ourselves for 20 minutes.
What did you think of base camp?
It's crazy because like I'd always seen it with all the tents from the climbing parties in there. And in October, there's nobody climbing there. The jet stream is over the mountains, so they can't get up on top because it's 200-mile-an-hour winds. But it is stark, quiet. I mean, it's beautiful in its desolation. I mean, because it's just rocks and ice. You're on the Khumbu Glacier. Trucker's Rock, which is the place everybody goes to with the spray painted elevation, which they unfortunately just put a stupid sign in front of about a week ago. It's one of those iconic spots that if you're into hiking or mountaineering, that's the spot that you've seen, and you get there and you realize that you've done it. You've accomplished something that a lot of people will never do. And we had a chance to kind of sit around and think about what it meant to each of us individually. Each of us kind of shot some video thoughts on it and took some pictures. And the crazy thing is, a couple of us live in Jacksonville, and one of my buddies was up on the rock and he did a Duval shout. It was a big Jaguars thing. Mm-hmm. And there was another guy that was walking into base camp at the time. He's like, "No way, are you guys from Jacksonville?" And so we ran into another dude from Jacksonville at Everest Base Camp.
Nice. Got
some pictures with him, and then turned around and came back. And at that point, Greg had medevaced out about, I think, an hour and a half before we got back there, which we felt better about, knowing that he was on his way to getting better. And we started our hike down. And and the crazy thing is, like, when you go up and do Kalapatar and you go and do base camp, so you're going up to 18,500 feet one day, getting up the next morning up to 17,500. We were spent, but the work is not over at that point.
Right. It's a lot of work going downhill.
You got to go back down. Yeah, it's downhill, uphill, downhill, uphill, downhill, uphill.
Sure.
And so we had started climbing out of Gorakshep to get back on the route going down. And at that point, I'm like starting to struggle again. And I looked to lighten up my pack. I gave my guide my jacket and I have like an alpaca pullover. I gave him those to lighten up my pack, like 2 pounds. Felt like it made all the difference in the world, just getting that off my back. Yeah. And so it was like lighten up anything you can. But from there, once we got down below about 16,000 feet, we started to, it flat. There's some spots that flatten out. We started to move along pretty good. And we went back to Farache and stayed at the same lodge we were at. Our guide asked us if we wanted to go up to Dingboche or go to Farache. And we're like, sister-in-law's place is pretty cool. Let's go back there. So we went back, and at that point, they didn't want us drinking alcohol on the route.
Yeah.
once you get past Namche, because you really want to know. It's like if you're feeling altered, why?
Yep.
And it dehydrates you and stuff as well. So, but it was crazy because every tea shop you go into, they've got kukri rum, beers, the whole thing. And so you're like, who the hell is drinking this? They're like, all the guides and all the porters who, these porters will be like chain smoking all the way up to 18,000 feet,
Wearing flip-flops, some of them.
Yeah. But it was just crazy. But so that night we just kind of, we were pretty worn out because it had been a long day. And so we went down, kind of hung out, had some dinner, put on some music, and everybody kind of got in their journals and crashed out. But the next 2 days were really, really long days. And the next day we went all the way down to Namche Bazaar, which was awesome. We had a fantastic kind of after party. We ended up in a blues bar watching the Asian Cup soccer final with Nepal against India with a Bollywood film crew and all the Nepali guides.
Wow.
And got absolutely hammered, which is the dumbest thing we could have ever done because you're still at 11,000 feet. And we bought our guide a beer and he was still in like taking care of us mode. And we're like, dude, tonight you're just one of the boys. So we're going to get some drinks. And he was just shaking his head going, you guys think that the easy stuff, it's all easy from here. It's not. Like, really, we need to call it a night. You need to get rested up. And so the next day we got up and it was rough. I mean, we were hungover, we're at elevation, and we've got like a 10-hour day, and it's a lot of up and down. It's a lot of, really kind of crazy stuff. And the last 2.5 hours coming up into Lukla, it was raining and like pouring rain. And this is the first like really bad weather we'd had on the whole thing. And so, we actually holed up at a little stop on the side of the road at one point where this guy just had this little building that had, like a 1-burner stove, and he made food for like the locals and, made tea. And we dove in there for a half hour to let the rain slow down and try to, warm up a little bit. But we got into Lukla in the dark, in the rain, got into our hotel. We were pretty stoked because we were right across from the airport. We finally had our own rooms for the first time. And we had ensuite bathrooms with showers, like hot showers, supposedly. But then I went to turn the shower on. They're like, oh, yeah, about that. We've been in a cloud for a day and a half. These showers are solar, so there's going to be no hot water. But they're like, well, we have the geyser showers, the geyser showers. And if the propane-powered ones, like they had in Farragher.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, cool. At this point, I'll take whatever. So I go down to get in the shower, and the water warmed up to 75 degrees. Was not the most, not the best shower I've ever had.
That's better than freezing.
But at that point, I was so disgusted with myself that it just had to, it had to be sacrificed and just had to deal with it. But we had fun. I mean, that night, we got a good dinner. I had our first meat for 11 days. Because I don't recommend that you eat meat once you get past Namche, because everything has to be carried in at that point, because they can't kill any animals in the park. You're in a national park. So we had some steak sizzlers, and they brought in some tongba, which is a Sherpa beer. They take millet and ferment it and keep pouring boiling water over it and just rehydrating it. Mm-hmm. And sneaky stuff, really good, but sneaky stuff. And they cut us off after a couple on that because they're like, you have to wake up early. And the next morning we got up and they had a liaison officer from the trekking company that walked us over to the airport, walked us right up to the front of the line, checked our stuff, and we were on the first flight out.
Nice. Would you have done anything differently in retrospect, or do you feel like it went kind of besides getting hammered when you shouldn't have?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I probably would have done a little bit different route. I mean, I think I would have probably done, Gokyo or 3 passes. It's just something that changes up the views. And I think that, after doing some research, because I really want to go back. I mean, I can't do it this year, but I'm hoping next year finances will allow. But, Everest is becoming so touristy at this point. I was seeing some videos this year in October around the time frame we went, and there's just people lined up all the way up there. I mean, it's the lodges are full to the point where people are sleeping on the floor in the dining rooms and stuff like that. And that to me is not my style. I mean, I love the fact that, that we got a chance to have a pretty rare experience being up there during a pretty peak time in terms of like what you can see, because, if you go up during the monsoon season, you can still do the hike. The problem is it's going to be cloudy, so you're not going to get the mountain views a lot. But we had the cool views and we didn't have the crowds. When we were on our way down, the crowds were building. we were passing a lot of people coming up, but we had a pretty awesome, pretty rare experience to where, to get crowd levels like that, you have to go in like December or January when it's, crazy cold. So, I would have probably done a little bit different route just to see something a little bit different. And probably would have found a way to pack a little bit lighter, because in the end, the biggest thing I would have done is taken my own sleeping bag, because I have a really nice North Face mountain bag that I got when I was still living in Washington that fits me, because I was 240 pounds. I'm 6'3". I'm a big guy. Most people who are doing that trek are not my size. And so most of the rental gear that they have in Kathmandu isn't really built to accommodate people my size.
Yep.
And so I got lucky, and I ended up only using my sleeping bag, like probably in, I think, Gorakshep and Lebuche, because all the tea houses have blankets, and they have like massive comfy duvets and stuff like that. So for the most part, I would just, I took up a sleeping bag liner. I would just climb on my sleeping bag liner and pile on the sheet, pile on the blankets, and be fine. But I would definitely take up my own sleeping bag. It's one of those comfort things where, you like to have your own stuff that's going to be close to your body like that. Especially that's mission critical, because, getting cold is a game changer. I hate being cold sleeping. So.
What's a top memory or moment for you from this trip?
Hanging out with my buddies at the top of the world, being on top of Kalapatar, thinking I just did something that a lot of people can't do, and coming from a situation where I was like that overweight and sedentary to being able to do something like that, and being asthmatic and being able to get past all that stuff. It was just a mind blower of an experience, and the views are so incredible. And I'm big into mountains. I love mountain views, and they, can turn my whole season around if I get a good mountain view. And that hike is just overflowing with them. I mean, you can't, especially the higher you get. When you get to base camp, you're surrounded by, everything around you is 25,000 feet or higher. And it's just absolutely incredible. And the views are unparalleled. And, it feels a lot like, Washington, but like 3 times as big.
Yeah.
It's just, things just keep going up and up and up. And you're like, oh my God, I remember when we were hiking up to the Everest View Hotel. There's this mountain called Tamsurku that's behind it. And it just filled up the sky. I mean, I look off to my right because the clouds lifted, and I'm like, I just kept going up and up and up and up. And it was insane. I didn't think things could be that big.
Yeah, that's a great way to describe it. And that sums up how I felt trekking in Nepal also, is that everything was just the mountain scenery you absolutely love, but bigger, grander, more impressive, more awe-striking. Everything was just on another scale. And of course it would be, I guess, they're the biggest mountains on Earth.
Yeah, and that was mind-blowing. And I really enjoyed the people. I mean, the Sherpa people particularly were so cool. I mean, they were so welcoming. And I mean, there's some of that because we're the first people up there actually on the route in a year and a half, and so people are happy to see people there. But they're just genuinely cool, generous, supportive people that will go out of their way to help you out. And the food was incredible. I mean, I never thought that I would be super happy being vegetarian because I'm not generally for a couple of weeks, but I didn't feel deprived at all. I mean, I ate really well the whole time. Love the dal bhat. I always try to eat the local stuff because in the end, like their versions of Western stuff are a little weird sometimes. But if you eat the stuff that the locals are eating, I mean, that works with their bodies at that elevation. And so they've got something figured out. And so they tend to keep it simple, carby, simple proteins. I mean, and it's dal bhat is like rocket fuel for hiking.
Totally.
It just works. And it's unlimited. So, I mean, you can load up a couple times and call it good. But yeah, I thought that was all super cool. I don't regret a whole lot of it other than a couple of drinking decisions. But yeah.
Wade Tonkin, thank you for telling me about your hike to Everest Base Camp. But while I've got you, I've got a few more questions if you don't mind.
Sure.
What is one piece of gear you don't leave home without?
I like having comfy clothes for sitting around after the day of hiking. I've got a pair of alpaca sweats and an alpaca pullover from Packaware that I adore. I mean, it was like what I changed into every day after we got done hiking on the trek. Get into that, some fresh socks, and just enjoy being warm and comfortable.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I like to bring, I have a pair of long johns that I bring when I go backpacking. And I have a friend who I hike with a lot who doesn't bring any extra clothes. He essentially goes ultralight and just sleeps in the clothes that he hiked in. And for me, it's so refreshing to be able to switch into something that's clean and cozy and it's yours and you're used to it. It's, your own little comfy pajamas.
Yeah, and if I redid my packing list for Everest, I probably would cut down like one pair of pants and a couple pairs of shorts because literally you could hike in the same thing pretty much every day as long as you have something comfortable and dry and clean to change into in your
Exactly.
garage.
What's the next trip on your list?
I'm hoping the West Highland Way. I want to do, even though I can't do the whole thing, I'm going to Scotland in October and I want to find a way to get at least a couple days in on the West Highland Way. And then I want to do that all eventually because Scotland, I went over there for a work trip a couple of years ago and killed some time in the Highlands, and one of the most incredibly naturally beautiful places you could ever imagine.
Have you listened to the episode that we did on it?
I have.
Okay, great. All right, then you're well taken care of.
Yeah.
What's the best hiking or trekking advice you've ever gotten?
My tour planner on this one gave it to me around the Everest Base Camp track hike, and he said, look, slow down and enjoy the views. He's like, bottom line is, if you go fast, even if you don't get sick, you're going to end up spending a lot of time in the lodge looking out at views that you could otherwise be in the middle of and really enjoying. He's like, just slow down and enjoy the ride. He's like, there's no reason to go fast.
That's great advice, because what I've found is that as much as we say we want to go back and see things again, most things we will never see again.
Yep.
That's just the reality of it. There's too many things in the world to see. And that's good travel advice generally. Really slow down and enjoy what you're seeing. Last question. What is the most valuable thing that trekking or hiking has taught you?
Nothing is impossible. And this is a thing that if you ever watch the 14 Peaks movie, that's Nim's whole thing is nothing is impossible. And if I would have looked back, 12 years ago at where I was from a health and fitness perspective, I never would have been able to do this. And, this totally redefined what I knew I was capable of. And when I came back, I PR'd at all my running distances because I knew what hard was. It's like I ran a 5K and I broke my PR by 4 minutes. And I was not being able to breathe for 27 minutes. So what? I couldn't breathe for 3 days. 27 minutes, no big deal. I could handle that. But it's just, anything is possible. It's just a matter of what you're willing to open your mind up to and, go after. That's
a great place to leave it. Wade Tonkin, thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So thanks again to Wade Tonkin for coming on the show. So let's now hear some excerpts of my conversation with Sean Keane about his trek to Everest Base Camp as well.
Eventually, you're very high up, and it's interesting because you find out what your body does when you're kind of deprived of oxygen. Mm-hmm. So I got a little bit sick on the first acclimatization day, which is a good time to have that happen. And I would brag to people, a lot of people don't throw up on the side of Mount Everest, but I left my mark on that place. But after a while, you kind of stop being hungry, which is weird because you're hiking for 8 to 10 hours a day, but your body just doesn't really prioritize that.
I think a lot of people do that. When they get to altitude, they just don't want to eat, and you really have to force yourself to eat in a way.
Yeah. Well, and we realized we were kind of eating like kids because no food sounded good to us. So we'd be eating these lunches of popcorn and fried potatoes and try to just drink 2 Cokes to get the calories for it instead. Also, I think it would be interesting to track it as a psychological experiment because we would play these sort of elaborate card games every night. And they were, these are some pretty intelligent guys we're playing with, good strategic moves. By about the 7th day, everybody was forgetting the rules, not counting correctly. The cognition is not at the highest level. And it made me think, because I, of course, decided to terrify myself before we even made the trip by rereading Into Thin Air, the John Krakauer book. But You're not actually at a point where, there are things that happen, but for the most part, it is very unusual for something bad to happen unless it's, sometimes like someone in their 60s will have a cardiac event or something, but no one's getting hypothermia, no one's getting blown off the mountain. But it started to make a lot of sense when you hear about these disasters when people are mountaineering and they just don't think to go down the path they came up on, or they just forget where the flag is. And it's kind of like, yeah, I could get that. I remember we got to base camp and one of my friends had been feeling sick and he wasn't sure if he could make it. And he started talking about how meaningful it was to him. And I just was weeping. I didn't even like consciously understand that I was weeping, but suddenly I was like, this is such a special moment for all of us.
What did you think of the whole tea house culture and staying in those little villages and all of that? How did that strike you?
I mean, I was shocked by how nice they are down near the bottom. We were at Namche Bazaar, and I think we had electric blankets and a pulsing shower. I think that might be sort of a recent upgrade, but it was really nice. And the fact that, I think I was expecting it to be a little bit more backpackery. Like I had I definitely had a big thing of wilderness wipes. But, up until about day 6, you could still take a shower for the equivalent of like, I don't know, $1.75 extra. The other thing that was kind of strange is that Instagram basically works all the way up to base camp. And that's the only website that does. I can only imagine that they just know their audience and they know that you haven't maybe officially made the trip unless it's also on your Instagram stories all the time, because that was a weird, like I wouldn't get email or anything like that. And that was it. But the tea house culture is great because you get these people that are very nice and fun. And at least the trek that we were making, we ended up seeing a couple people that would be at different houses and they knew our guides and porters. And so periodically it was really nice to just hang out in the little lounges. The people that do this speak many languages. They know every card game in the world. We had this great guide named Rinji who honestly looked like a movie star. He was just one of the more handsome men I've met in my entire life. And we were about 5 days in and he was very helpful, like telling us lore. And we asked him, we flew in to Lukla, to the world's most dangerous airport. How long would it take you by yourself to get to the base camp? And he goes, 3 or 4 days. And we said, really, really, Rinji? And he said, well, if I started at dawn, I could probably make it in a day. These guys were just the fittest people you've ever seen in your life. And that's not just the guides. You'll be hiking with your poles and you're dragging yourself up the mountain. And then you have to move to the right because a 75-year-old woman wearing basically like beach sandals who has a full pack of food on her back is basically jogging past you. And I've just thought like these are maybe the greatest athletes I've ever seen in my life. They don't get any credit for it, but it's amazing like how good and just like relaxed and kind of, we trained, but there's no real way to train for that kind of altitude. So it's almost like they're these really fit babysitters.
All right. So how did it come about that you ended up doing stand-up while you were hiking the Everest Base Camp trek?
So we had joked about it with our guide, Rinji, about how you should do a show. And he just said, like, do you want to do a show? And I said, sure, set up a show on the side of Mount Everest. Like, I kind of thought we were joking around. But also, I just sort of to keep myself occupied, I had a notebook where I was constantly making notes and trying to think of jokes and things that people said. So I did a 15-minute set that was probably 12 to 13 minutes of it was jokes I'd just written in the previous 10 days, which is not really the way you necessarily want to do the comedy show. I'm not sure a lot of these jokes would have worked outside of the town of Namche Bazaar, but you never know. So they set it up and we found out, 2 days before we got to base camp, Rinju says, yeah, it's a go. It's going to be at the Hungry Yak in Namche Bazaar. And I went on in between sets of this, I don't know how to describe them, but they were like a Nepalese cover band, but they were their look was very rockabilly at the same time. So I went on after they closed, I basically performed for 20 minutes at their intermission. And so I was going after a very moving rendition of Take Me Home, Country Roads by John Denver, played by this house band.
Nice.
And a lot of people came just because you kind of end up on the same schedule as other people in your group. So there was this big group from Denver, or the outskirts of the Denver area, where we would constantly be passing and being passed by them, just depending on the time. And then there were some people who were kind of like, it seemed like they maybe had some kind of businesses in Namche. Like the bartenders from the other bar that was closed were there. And then there was one table that had just summited Everest right before that. And they were very drunk, but also just elated because they summited the mountain. And I attempted to do some crowd work, and that was not the situation to do crowd work in necessarily, but it made it very exciting. Also, the whole time, the mic they had was for the band, so it has like a weird reverb effect the whole time, like you might be singing a rockabilly version of Country Roads. Like that's what the sound setting would be. But yeah, my friend filmed it, and maybe it'll be like a bonus EP or something later, because a lot of the jokes about yeah, go ahead, sorry.
I was gonna say, how did it go over? Did you feel like it went pretty well considering the circumstances and the sort of fact that you were trying new material in this odd
Yeah,
setting?
I mean, it was a very strange gig. I realized that maybe wordplay about the English language is not quite as successful up there, but people really liked telling jokes about how Nepal should host the Olympics and talking about dumplings like that people could really get behind. My character of Yakov Smirnov, who was like Yakov Smirnov if he was a yak, that doesn't work for anybody. It's like that reference doesn't work in Nepal or America. Like that's I thought it was, and again, sometimes you're writing things down and your brain's a little bit deprived of oxygen, and you feel a little more confident about the quality of the material that maybe was justified. But I think it was just like the perfect amount of time, because I didn't really go much more than 15 minutes, which was just right for people's attention span. And the band got to have a couple drinks, you know.
So it was kind of a mix, it sounds like, of locals and trekkers and climbers and like this whole, so like, how do you even figure out what's going to work for all of those people? Or
there's no way to do it. Well, especially when I decided, I mean, I probably should have just mixed in some regular jokes from my set. But I had this confidence, like, when am I ever going to tell these jokes again? And it's kind of like, well, yeah, but there's also maybe a reason you would never tell these jokes again that you just wrote on the side of a mountain. But yeah, and there was also the somewhat surprise element where some of the people definitely knew they were going to watch me do comedy. Some of them were a little bit ambushed by it. And everybody was very nice about it, but I really think especially the true mountaineers were just very confused by what was going on in the first place. Just a guy doing 15 minutes of English language observational comedy on the way to Mount Everest.
And I think it would also be interesting because a lot of the people you meet in Nepal who are either trekking or climbing are not, English is not their native language. There's
No.
Germans,
I mean, it was
a lot of French, a lot of Italians, all these people who are going to struggle just to understand the jokes to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, everybody kind of speaks English for the most part, but it's not like they're understanding the puns, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, Sean, I appreciate you coming on the show to talk about your Everest Base Camp trek and your stand-up comedy that you did in Nepal. Before we go, though, I understand that you have some new comedy coming out that's going to be available.
Yeah, it just came out Friday the 15th. It debuted at #1 on the charts because it's Otherwise, it's very. You can do that your first week. It's very hard to knock off Weird Al, who dominates the comedy album charts.
Okay.
It's called America's Uncle Dad. I recorded it at the Punchline in San Francisco. It doesn't have any hiking stories, but it does have a good story about me making a bad decision about taking mushrooms on a river floating trip once. So that's
Oh, nice.
the most
Yeah.
outdoorsy experience of me becoming terrified and almost heckling kayakers accidentally while on the river. But yeah, you can get it. It's on Blonde Medicine Records, and you can find it at Bandcamp or iTunes or wherever you get MP3s, Spotify, wherever.
And where can people learn more about you?
You can find me on Twitter. I'm at Sean Keane, just SeanKeane. And on Instagram, I am Jort Center, like Sports Center, but with jean shorts.
Got it. Okay, perfect. I love it. Sean Keane, thanks for coming on the program. I really appreciate
Hey, thanks
it.
for having me.
So thanks again to Wade Tonkin and Sean Keane for coming on the show. And I hope that we've inspired you to hike the Everest Base Camp trek. Though I realize that not everyone wants to brave this kind of altitude, but for a lot of folks, something like this is a once-in-a-lifetime achievement. And if you've enjoyed this episode, tell a friend about it, or better yet, give us a good review on whichever podcast service you use. And keep in mind that this podcast is entertainment and meant to spark your interest. If you decide to hike the trail, do your own research. And like anything else worth doing, outdoor adventure has risk. So when you go, pack your common sense. And when you get back, tell me how it went. Next time on Trails Worth Hiking, we go to the other extreme from this episode. We go to sea level. I mean entirely at sea level, for a trail that is going through constantly changing ecosystems, from sand dunes to pine forest to palmetto and oak to cypress swamp and wet prairies, where we'll have to keep our eyes peeled for alligators. Next time on Trails Worth Hiking, we hike from the Atlantic coast to Lake Okeechobee on the Ocean to Lake Trail in Florida. If you have any questions or feedback on this episode or ideas for future episodes, including if you want to be a guest and talk about a trail that you've hiked, reach out to me at trailsworthhiking@gmail.com. And please follow us on Instagram at Trails Worth Hiking Podcast and subscribe on YouTube. Before we go, I'll leave you with a few clips of Sean's actual Namche Bazaar comedy performance. But let me sign off before we do that. So start planning your next hike, and before you know it, you'll be on the trail. Thanks for listening.
It's really weird to see helicopters up here because they're below you. That's a strange experience. You're usually only having like an action movie audience. And it's interesting because when you see a helicopter, it's either like someone is critically injured or Leonardo DiCaprio ran out of cigarettes. You know what I mean? It's a disaster or the richest person in the world. And so I'm either thinking, I hope that person doesn't die, or I hope that person dies. I hope that person dies. It's incredible. These are like the greatest athletes I've ever seen in Nepal, especially the guides taking things up the mountains, just strapped to their backs up a vertical staircase wearing beach sandals the whole time. It made me think that the Winter Olympics are kind of bullshit, actually, to be honest, because it's always these winter sports where people are trying to get out of the snow all the time. It's like, oh, get to the top of this mountain and ski down as fast as you can, you know? Oh, get in a little bobsled and zoom down. I want to see people going up in the Winter Olympics. I think Nepal should host the Winter Olympics, and I've got a couple ideas. One of the events would just be called Bob Sled. Bob is a rich Australian tourist coming up there, getting helicoptered into the mountain, and the competitors need to carry Bob's sled up an icy track. And the winner would be a 70-year-old Sherpa woman. That's who would win. She would destroy. I also think they should have Everest Base Camp figure skating, right? Like, put some sequins on a puppy jacket. You know what I mean? Let's see if you can do a triple toe loop with your toes chattering, buddy. And then the other one I have is curling up at the Gorakshep Lodge. And the winner is the last person to complain about how shitty it is. Thanks, guys. That joke works all over the world, by the way. I will be doing that back in San Francisco constantly. Oh, we were here for an election party in Dinguche. We got to a incredible party. Dinguche, the Marxist candidate won. I was not surprised by that. Do you know why Marxists do so well in Nepal? Because every city ends in che, right? That also works all over the world, by the way. That's the other thing that was interesting is just about a week ago, Nepal finally got the 5-day work week, right? And, and I thought that was incredible. I'm like, finally, a 5-day work week. Finally, the poor people of Nepal can get some time off. And then I learned that Nepal has 133 federal holidays. I did the math. They have a 3.5-day work week that's now been knocked down to a 2.5-day work week. And as a comedian, I thought that is why I feel so comfortable in this country. That's about as much as, I mean, that's still kind of a heavy work week for me,